Hi folks, this is Donald. If you're someone like me who is still trying to learn everything there is to know about urban sketching and hasn't mastered every single technique, and maybe you haven't even perfected your own specific sketching style, then I think one of the things you can do to really advance your drawing abilities is to push yourself to sketch things that you ordinarily wouldn't try. And in this case, this sort of scene is exactly the sort of thing that I would purposely avoid. Ultra complex with so much detail to pack in. It really goes against the grain of the sorts of drawings I would typically do, which are much simpler and probably a bit less serious, because this seems like quite a serious scene, but there's so much architectural detail, and I really wanted to push myself to see if I could draw a scene like this. It's something I've been meaning to do for ages, and I think it's finally time to push myself out of my comfort zone when it comes to the drawing. So as you're watching this speeding along, and don't worry, I will slow part of it down to show you how I created some of the extreme detail once we get to that part. And if you would like to have a go at sketching this yourself, the reference photo link is in the description. So I started off with the foreground items, as I always do. Now there aren't that many foreground items in this scene, only the two lanterns, and they don't even really stand out because apart from the doors, everything in this scene is grey. So they might not be that clear, but they are there. So what I did was I made them significantly bigger and more prominent in the scene. This wasn't entirely deliberate. This is because I no longer do any pencil planning. I just go straight in with the ink. And so that was why I drew those slightly bigger than I probably would have if I'd planned it out in pencil. Once I'd drawn that, I went in with all the curves of the arch, and I drew that slightly too narrow. Again, if I was drawing this with pencil, first I would have made that a bit wider, made some adjustments, but I'm really just trying to get into the idea of drawing freely and going for it. No holding back, no mistakes that I'm going to be bothered about. I'm just going to keep drawing. And one of the perfect things about drawing highly detailed architectural drawings like this is if you do make a mistake, then you can just scribble over it with lots of squiggles and everything will be hidden. As we get into the section where I'm doing all of the scribbles and squiggles, and as I said, I will slow this down in a moment so I can show you better what I'm doing, but I really did enjoy getting lost in the endless amounts of squiggles and detail that you can put in. So often in sketches, I do love that part of it, just spending the hours drawing, and it was hours. This was about a 3-hour sketch. I just love getting lost in the detail of what I'm drawing, and I noticed at one point that I hadn't thought about anything for several minutes and thought, how good is that? It just completely switches off the brain and makes you concentrate entirely on a piece of architecture that if you were just walking down the street you would completely ignore. And yet to sit and study this, it's such a good way of relaxing, and as I've talked about in the past about mindfulness, you're just entirely engaged in the act of sketching and really not thinking about anything else, and it's just such a peaceful way to spend the time. And it's why I always say that far more important than the end result of the sketches that I do, what I really try to concentrate on is the enjoyment factor of it whilst I'm doing it. What it looks like at the end is almost irrelevant. Not totally irrelevant, I do want it to look good at the end, but really this was just about spending 3 hours pretty much just sketching away. Okay, so I've slowed it down now so you can see the speed that I was actually drawing at. And for the archway, to fill in the detail, it's just lots of swirly S-shaped curves and then a few circles with some squiggles in the middle. And I go right the way around the arch like this, slow and steady. I'm not in any rush at all. I think one of the things that you do hear a lot in urban sketching is that there's some kind of pressure that you have to go fast, as if there's some kind of urgency to all of this that you need to get over with quickly so you can get onto the next scene and draw that one really quickly as well. Whereas I try to do the absolute opposite of that. I want to take ages over my sketches. I want to get lost in it, lost in the process of doing it, because that's what it's all about for me. Just to keep repeating myself, it's not about what it looks like at the end. It's the fact that I sat down and drew this, and having only just discovered art within the last couple of years, this is not something I would ordinarily have been doing. To sit for an evening and draw a picture is such a freeing and fun way to spend the time as an adult, when that's really something you only do as a child. And I think how wonderful it is that I've discovered this activity that I can do in this way, and especially a scene like this that I've never drawn before. This was something completely new to me. I didn't feel like I was repeating myself, and I didn't feel like I was copying anyone else. I was literally just making this up as I go along. No idea where it was going, no idea what it would look like at the end. And you could argue that I went overboard in some respects with the detail. There's just so many squiggles, so many swirls. But what I did find is that the more and more squiggles and swirls I was adding, the more effective and more it looked like the actual scene. Once I had finished with the ink line drawing, I did a bit of shading, and I didn't want to go overboard, but I did want to add a little bit of shading here and there just to bring out the contrast in the scene even more. So I started off with a cold grey 1 in the Faber-Castell India ink markers that I always use. These are called Pitt Artist brush pens if you're new here or new to these pens. And these are completely light fast, waterproof and permanent. And as far as I'm aware, these are the only markers of this kind that do that job. So I went around the whole scene with the cold grey 1, and then I'm going to layer it up with darker shades. Now I didn't add many, but I went straight to the cold grey 4, which is the second darkest in the range, and I put that over the lanterns because I wanted to darken them and bring those forward, really detach them from the scene behind. And I thought that really worked actually in this scene, because there's so much detail. There really had to be something to distinguish the lanterns from what goes behind. So once I'd done that, I went to a cold grey 3 and I coloured in some various bricks, various bits of the doorway and other bits and pieces, all instinctively, no great plan, purely to try and create as much contrast as possible. And I do wonder if I went overboard and maybe I lost a little bit of the line work and the curly bits that I'd been drawing in for so many hours. But overall, for a first attempt at a scene like this, I thoroughly enjoyed just the activity of sitting and drawing swirls and squiggles for 3 hours. It was great fun, and I definitely want to try it again, and I would encourage you to have a go at this if you have never done it. It might look too complex, but if I can do it, you can do it. So download the photograph if you want to have a go, or pick some similar scene and see how you get on. If we want to keep learning and improving our drawing, then sometimes we really do need to push ourselves. And I'm really pleased that I did push myself to try out something far more complex than I ordinarily would try. And for more sketching inspiration like this, click on this video right here, and I will see you in the next one.